Hey guys, so in this video I wanted to go over a general itemization sort of guide and talk about exactly how I go about itemizing and teach you some different things that will help you be able to come up with your own builds and understand the way that these different sections work together. I'll be covering things like why the cheap items are so good, whether you want to be buying weapon damage or fire rate, whether your hero wants to be buying, all spirit items or weapon items and different active items that are good. I'll not go in depth on every single item. This is more understanding what different things do, like bullet resist as opposed to bullet shield, and different little nuances like that that will be extremely important to understand going forward. I think the next video I'm going to do will be specifically talking about how to itemize in lane if you're struggling and how to counter different characters in lane. But in the meantime, do like, subscribe, and enjoy the video. So guys, to start off this video, the first thing I want to talk about is probably the biggest mistake I see very often amongst especially new players when it comes to itemization in this game. And that is talking about spirit damage and gun damage heroes. Now, arguably every hero can do spirit damage and gun damage, and they can have a build for both, or they could be support builds, right? But let's take an example of someone who would probably deal mainly spirit damage. So we're going to start with 7. Every single one of his abilities deals spirit damage, and they scale pretty well, which you can see here. You see the scaling, the star with the 0.2 there and the 0.07 tells you how much extra, DPS or duration you're going to get per spirit power. So a lot of people, they're going to look at this character, and I've seen it many times, and they're going to go into the weapon tab, and they're going to say, I don't really want weapon damage. I'm a spirit damage dealer, so I'm going to focus purely on spirit damage. And I'll see 7 players in lane, buy something like this. Maybe some health, some spirit lifesteal. And they'll just have no orange items until very late in the game when they want to pick up things like, soul shredder bullets, which is always a good buy. But I'll just see this way too often, completely ignoring the other colors other than for, like general things like health, because they think their hero is only spirit based. And even if that was true, this is not the way to do it. The way the itemization is designed in this game is so that there are very many synergies throughout all the colors. If you were to go for a spirit build, there will be plenty of weapon items that are cheap or expensive that will contribute to a spirit build, that will give you spirit power. For example, Hollow Point Ward here is giving you spirit shield health and spirit power. You have Soul Shredder bullets. It's going to amp your spirit damage by 10% when you're shooting people and give you 20% spirit lifesteal. There's Spiritual Overflow. When you shoot an enemy enough times, you build up a plus 50 spirit power buff and some fire rate, and then the stats are also giving you spirit lifesteal and cooldown reduction. So what I'm trying to say is that don't lean in too hard to one direction, especially early game. At the very start of the game, something like monster rounds can help you a lot. Headshot booster, even if you're not going to be dealing too much gun damage, if you're focused on using your abilities. Headshot booster as a little poke is just a nice way to get a big burst of damage in lane, even if you are not a gun damage focused hero. Another example of this would be for support heroes. I see people play Kelvin support all the time, and that is fine. They'll go extra charge for the nade because they want 2 heals, right? They'll go health nova, they'll go healing booster, rescue beam, blah, blah, blah. And then they'll literally buy no gun items. And I am telling you, this game is going to be way better if you just buy some gun items. The cheap items are very good. And that's the next point I want to get onto. And then the other example would be for a gun damage build. Let's say Wraith is doing a gun damage build because obviously she has a very good gun, very easy to use, very little recoil and a lot of ammo. There are many things you don't want to skip in the other sections too. Like you were going to want to look for bullet lifesteal in the greens. You're going to want to look in spirit as well though. Obviously every build wants some greens. The complication usually becomes between the purple items and the orange items, weapon and spirit. For a gun build, you do also want spirit items. It works both ways. For instance, bullet resist shredder. reduces bullet resist on enemies when you deal spirit damage. Now, Wraith has plenty of ways to deal spirit damage regardless of what build she is. I could be on a gun build right now, but I'm still going to throw a card every so often. And full auto, it's going to give every single bullet I shoot while it's active spirit damage, right? So them two things alone are going to proc bullet resist shredder, which you'll see indicated by this icon above his head right there. Now our gun build is better because of a relatively cheap purple item. And there are many different cases of this. So I recommend you guys, when you're actually going over builds and coming up with a build yourself, make sure to just, give it a quick look and see if there's anything that would help your gun damage for a gun damage build. Like here, extra weapon damage. Great. You can pick this up early. It gives you an extra card, which is a huge amount of damage in lane. And the weapon damage is great for a weapon damage build. There are many different examples of this. You'll find a lot of weapon damage here. Even on Boundless Spirit, you'll find a lot of weapon damage. So before I let this segment go on for too long, the point is, if you're a weapon build, don't ignore spirit items. And if you're a spirit build, don't ignore weapon items. They synergize very well together and it's designed very well. Now, the next thing I want to explain is how extremely valuable the 500 items are in almost every tier. And that just because an item costs more money doesn't necessarily mean it is that much better. So from a 3,000 item to a 6,000 item, you would think they're going to be around twice as powerful, but this is not necessarily the case. The 3,000 items are going to give you more bang for your buck than these items will, but these items will be better. So it's understanding how to scale, when you need to scale, when you should save up for these items, and when you should opt for cheaper ones. So the 500 items are all going to give a crazy amount of weapon damage for being a 500 item. The green items also give you an insane amount of health. You buy this at level 1 and that's 220 health straight away, which is insane because you're getting the 11% base health plus the 160 bonus health. Weapon items we'll talk about real quick. Let's look at some tier 2 items first so I can explain to you the point. Let's talk about slowing bullets. 16% weapon damage, 5 spirit power, bullets apply movement slow. So the movement slow is a unique thing to this item, but the stats can be on any sort of item. So in total, we're getting 26% weapon damage because of the 10% you see on the left of my cursor here from a tier 2. And we're getting the 16% there, so it's 26% weapon damage for a 1,200 item. Now for an item that costs less than half the price, we can actually get more weapon damage. This item is going to give us 31% weapon damage when we are in close range to a target. Now, of course, that's a conditional, but let's compare something else. Basic mag. This is going to give you 21% weapon damage and 26% ammo. Almost the same amount of weapon damage as this item, only 500 off, and it is 750 cheaper. So the first thing to understand is that these items are very good. Do not be afraid of buying cheap items from every single tier. As flex slots are going to help you, open up your slots later. And also, if the game goes super late and you need to sell cheap items, it's not a problem because your economy is going to be super strong at that point anyway. You're going to generate the 250 souls you lose from selling one of these very quick and replace them with something better. Also, another point is that too many cheap items is not always a bad thing as well because there are components. So if you buy close quarters here, it will hover over or it will highlight point blank in tier 3. Now, you also see that it says is component of point blank. Now that means when you buy point blank later, it's actually just going to upgrade close quarters for you and it's not going to require another slot. Same with basic mag and titanic mag. And there are many different cases of this. In the spirit section, there is most notably extra spirit, which is a component of improved spirit, and then improved spirit is a component of boundless spirit. So that's 2 separate upgrades, all taking the same slot. So generally, when you're buying cheap items and trying to decide which ones you want to have in mind that you're only going to sell maybe 1 or 2 maximum. You don't want to be selling more than 2 items per game, and you don't want to fill up your slots all with cheap items because if you don't get flex early, then you're really, really in a tricky situation. You might not be able to get items you want later on. So basic mag, I would say for a lot of gun heroes is always a safe bet. because if you end up running out of flex slots, you can just upgrade it to Titanic Mag and still get value that way. Headshot Booster is one of those where, you know, not every hero enjoys Headhunter, the upgrade. So Headshot Booster becomes a throwaway item for a lot of heroes. It's very strong in lane, as I said before. As you know, just a short burst like that can give you a crazy amount of burst damage, and it's good poke in lane. And then you would then later, once you've filled up your slots, say I have Swift Striker, Escalating Resilience, Burst Fire. Now I'm trying to buy my 4th gun item. Later on, I will sell Headshot Booster and I will get something like Crippling Headshot. So it's important to know which sort of items you want to build to give you a boost in lane, but then sell a little bit later, and you don't want to end up selling too many. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is a general thing that covers all the different item sections, and that will be active items. You'll find them at the end of every single section almost. Here, there's only Fleetfoot. Here you have 3 different active items and another 3 there. You'll see the same here. There's a lot of active items, and these will go in a separate slot where you will need a keybind. They're basically like another ability that have a cooldown. Usually, since they are limited slots, that would logically mean that these are powerful. They are balanced around having limited slots. Utilizing active items can take your build to another level. For instance, there is something called Warp Stone. You might be going for a lot of damage, but then find yourself a little bit squishy. Do you necessarily need to buy bullet armor? No, you can just go for something like Warp Stone. It has only a 16-second cooldown, and for 5 seconds after you teleport, you're getting 30% bullet resist. At the same time as this item having great stats for a weapon damage build. It has 20% weapon damage, plus the 14% base from a tier 3, and plus 8 spirit power. So when I TP, you'll see in the bottom left here, I have 30% bullet resist. At the same time, it's giving me great mobility, and, you know, I can avoid many different things like this. If a Wraith ults me, I can, you know, TP away, get some distance from it, which will allow me to run far. She might not be able to catch up and kill me. If a Lash is trying to ult me, I might be able to TP out of his rope range. There's many different use cases for this item. Then you have things like Shadow Weave. Shadow Weave literally makes you invisible. And as you can see, that would obviously be an incredible tool for ganking people. So if you're on a gun build or a spirit build, the stats this item provides with the fire rate and the spirit power are extremely valuable for your build, on top of giving you this unique active that you can use to gank. Then we have more like pure utility items. We have something like Metal Skin. Metal Skin is an option you can take defensively. When you pop this item, you become immune to bullets for a little while. Then we have things like Divine Barrier. You know, you pop it on yourself or an ally, they gain some movement speed, and they gain a lot of shields for 5 seconds. Understanding how your heroes can use these items is going to take your game to the next level. You can't be ignoring active items. They are so extremely powerful right now, and I think they will be for a long time. Last example I'll give you is something like Silence Glyph. If you're playing Wraith and you want to ult people so that you can kill them for free pretty much because they're stunned, you might struggle against heroes like Infernus, for example, because Infernus, I'm going to ult him, and then he's going to use his Flame Dash to run away, and I won't be able to catch him in time as the ult hits him to kill him. So I would want to buy something like Silence Glyph, even if I was playing on a gun build, because then I can silence him and then ult him, and he can't Flame Dash away. So understanding which one of these to get is very important. So last thing I want to touch on before I move specifically onto the item segments themselves, the weapon items, vitality items, and spirit items, I want to talk about flex slots. So you need to understand how flex slots work. It's very important. These 4 flex slots can be filled up with any of the items. So if you run out of weapon slots and you can't buy any more, all slots are full, this will be because you don't have any flex slots left. These, if you hover over them, tell you exactly how they are unlocked. For the purpose of the video, all I can do is unlock all of them at once. So there you go. All these flex slots are now open, and now I can fill them with anything. Since I have no vitality items, if I buy any vitality items, they will just go here, and same with the spirit items. But now that all my slots are full, if I buy a weapon item, it will go in flex. If I buy a vitality item, it will also go in flex. If I buy a spirit item, it will also go in flex. So these are basically 4 slots that can be filled up with anything. You could have 4 extra spirit items if you wanted to. But also, if you fill them up with a vitality item and a weapon item, and then you don't have these 2 slots, you can actually sell something from over here to free up a flex slot. It will not stay in the flex slot if there is one of these free. So if I sell headshot booster, it's opened me up a flex slot and put hollow point over here instead of in a flex. And that is the unique case in which you can replace one colored item with a different colored item. So again, I can have headshot booster in a flex slot. So if I want another purple item, but all my slots are full, and the problem is I don't want to sell any of these because they're all important for my build. As my flex slots are filled with orange and green items, I can sell any of those to open me up another slot to fill with a spirit item. So here we'll sell headshot booster to get mystic reverb. And let's say we want another one. We can sell any of these. Extra health. Now there's no green items in the flex slots. And we can buy a purple item. Okay, so now we have all the basics out the way. Let's get on to some specifics when it comes to these different sections, the weapon, vitality, and spirit. I want to talk about the nuances and the differences between the different buffs you'll receive on this page, mainly being weapon damage and fire rate, and which is the best to scale and increase your damage. The first thing you want to understand is that the weapon damage bonus you're seeing here is exactly that. It's a weapon damage bonus. It's not a flat modifier. It starts off as a flat modifier because you have none yet. You have no weapon damage bonus. So right now, the damage I'm dealing is 100% of my base damage. I'll put myself at max level to increase my base bullet damage to the highest possible. So right now, I am dealing 11 to 12 damage per bullet, which is 100% of our weapon damage. Now let's buy this and get 31% weapon damage plus, and that will increase our damage by 31%, as you would expect it to. But now our total weapon damage isn't 100% anymore, it is 131%. So increasing this further, getting the 21% we would get from basic mag, is now going to take our weapon damage bonus from 31% to 52%. So instead of increasing my overall damage by another 21%, it's just increasing my weapon damage bonus. So instead of dealing 131% weapon damage, I'm now dealing 152% weapon damage. So as you can imagine, the more weapon damage you stack up, the less value you actually get from each successive item. Now, fire rate also works in the same way. It's going to be a fire rate bonus. Every time you buy a fire rate item, it's not going to take your current fire rate and multiply it by that percentage. It's going to add on to your fire rate bonus stat in the same way that weapon damage does, so that it doesn't get too crazy and multiply with everything, giving you infinite damage late game. This means that when people ask, on this hero, should I be building fire rate or should I be building weapon damage? The answer is always you should build both. Apart from in a rare case like Haze, where her third ability actually gives her weapon damage, in which case you would build more fire rate to abuse this third ability. But ignoring that, since we now understand that weapon damage is going to fall off the more of it you buy, and so is fire rate, you want a good mix of both to get the best DPS increase you possibly can get. I recommend going weapon damage early game rather than fire rate, unless you're a hero who's going to benefit specifically from fire rate like Haze or Infernus. Infernus needs to apply his burn, so fire rate will help him out. I can understand going fire rate on Infernus, but if you're focusing more on weapon damage, then you want to go for some weapon damage first, as your base damage is kind of low at the start of the game. So increasing your fire rate is going to make you run out of your mag way too fast. Sure, you'll do a little bit more DPS, but your damage per mag is not going to increase that much if you're just going for fire rate. You're going to need to maybe increase your mag size or just get some weapon damage. Here, just some weapon damage, but this is going to increase my damage per mag. And once you've got a decent amount of weapon damage, let's say I go for a build that looks something like this. I have 2 ammo increases here, a weapon damage increase there, another damage increase there. Now I have a lot of weapon damage bonus. So I have a lot of weapon damage here. I already have 61% extra weapon damage. So if I was to get another weapon damage item, it says here I'm getting 13% plus 6% more weapon damage, right? But that would only move me up to 80%, which is a lot less than a 19% weapon damage increase, since it is weapon damage bonus. So at this point, you're going to be wanting to increase your fire rate, as none of these items you've got so far are increasing your fire rate at all, which means the first fire rate purchase you make will actually multiply your DPS pretty much flat. As you can see here, it's a 0% fire rate right there. The first fire rate item I'm going to buy is going to give me a 22% fire rate bonus, meaning I have 122% fire rate now. So I have basically multiplied all my damage in terms of DPS by 22%. So you definitely always want to get a mix of fire rate and weapon damage items. One thing I'll quickly touch on that is always important when you're playing a hero that wants to deal a lot of damage is heal reduction. The first instance of which, and probably the most powerful that we're going to see in this video, is Toxic Bullets. Toxic Bullets is a weapon item that isn't going to provide you with too much damage. It's going to provide you with 14% weapon damage, so you might not look too hard at this item when you're first picking up the game, but it's going to deal a 5% of their enemy's health per second, at the same time as reducing their healing by 65%. So if you're against a hero that is going to be healing a lot, you will kill them faster by buying this item than you would by buying an item specifically for damage, like Hunter's Aura, which will reduce their resistances. Or you're going to deal more damage with this item, but they're going to heal. So you have to look at different utility things like that in these sections. You can also, again, talking about the synergy, think of ways to become tanky, because if you're building full damage, you're going to die very fast in fights, and you're not going to get an opportunity to use your damage. So like I said, these items all synergize very well together. You don't have to go Vitality to become tanky. You can get something like Escalating Resilience, which is going to give you 2% bullet resist per bullet you land on an enemy, up to a max of 40% bullet resist. So if you look in the bottom left right here, you see no bullet resist. I shoot one bullet, 2%. And that builds up very fast. This item is going to give you weapon damage and fire rate, something I talked about being great. And it's going to make you more tanky. So look for items that, double dip into different types of stats that you will want going into late game. Now let's talk about vitality items. First, I'm going to start off with the most commonly misunderstood items in this section, and that will be the armors as opposed to the barriers. You have combat barrier, enchanter's barrier, bullet armor, and spirit armor. Bullet armor is going to give you 25% bullet resist, whereas combat barrier is going to give you 325 bullet shield. Understanding the difference between these is extremely important. Combat barrier is going to give you this extra bar here of bullet shield. It's effectively extra health, but only to bullet damage. So I will make Infernus my mimic here. If he shoots me in the head once, you'll see the bullet shield goes down a little bit. But Infernus also ignites me with his bullets. So he's going to light me on fire, and I'm still going to take health damage because I don't actually have any spirit shield. It's only bullets that my shield is going to absorb. And when this shield runs out, you will see it goes on cooldown for 50 seconds. And in 50 seconds, this shield will come back up, and I will have the buffs again from having a weapon shield active, and it will make me tankier against bullets. Now, bullet armor itself is not going to give me a shield like this at all. What it's going to do is it's going to give me 25% bullet armor, which means every single bullet that hits me, I'm going to only receive 75% of its damage, as 25% of it is being reduced. Obviously, early game combat barrier is going to be a lot stronger, because having just a huge amount of basically flat health against bullets is going to go a lot further than the 25% bullet resist. But the thing about barriers is that they never take your resistances into account. They always have 0 resistances. You will always take full bullet damage to your bullet barriers. Even if you have some bullet resist, I'm still going to take the same amount of bullet damage to my barrier regardless. So that can be a kind of double-edged sword. That means if enemies are building a lot of shredders, like if someone is running Hunter's Aura to reduce your bullet resist. If they are running Bullet Resist Shredder to reduce your bullet resist, they're not actually going to deal increased damage by taking you into the minus, as that is a thing. If I sell the bullet armor here and it give you an example of that, take control of Infernus by Hunter's Aura on him. Now you can see my bullet resist when I am in the range of Infernus is minus 27%. So he would be dealing increased damage to me. It would basically be multiplying his entire bullet damage output by 27%. However, if I have a barrier, because barriers don't take bullet resist into play at all, he's not going to deal increased damage to me. So the way I said it's a double-edged sword, as yes, that's a great use case for barriers, and you will be tankier using the barriers in this way. However, late game, when people have a crazy amount of damage, if you have opted to buy barriers instead of resists, then your barriers are also going to get shredded extremely fast because your resists don't counter them. So just take that into account, and remember that the general rule is that armors, spirit armor and bullet armor, will be better in the late game, and barriers will be better in the early game. Now let's touch on double dipping again and look at vitality this time. You can see here extra health is giving me health, but it's also giving me weapon damage. It's again just another example of the items in these tiers synergizing with each other. You can get a lot of weapon damage from green items. You don't have to focus purely on the orange items to get your weapon damage. But vitality has some of the best utility in the game. Going into late game, the thing that's going to get you killed most, regardless of how tanky you are, is getting stunned. Because if you can't move, it doesn't matter how tanky you are, you're probably going to die. So an item like Unstoppable is amazing for this. It's an active item, gives you great stats, but when you pop the active, for 6 seconds, you become immune to pretty much everything in the game apart from damage. So no one is going to stun you while this is active, and it will allow you to play your game and execute your hero's game plan. Another example would be something like Debuff Reducer. Doesn't have the greatest stats in the world, but the passive is extremely insane. 30% debuff resist. Infernus's Afterburn is going to last 30% less time on me. Stuns that stun me, I'm going to be stunned for 30% less time, etc. So there's a lot of different items here that aren't necessarily just vitality, as you might think. It's not just health, but it's overall survivability. At the same time, you have debuffs like this. I spoke about heal reduction being very important. Heal Bane here in the Vitality tree can synergize well with other heal reductions. Your spirit damage applies healing reduction, minus 40%. So you buy this item, you can buy Toxic Bullets. Now these do stack diminishingly, meaning that the 65% plus the 40% will not give them negative 105%. It will give them around 70 or 75%, but it's still a good increase. When I deal the spirit damage from Toxic Bullets, it will apply this. And synergies like this are just so important to look for and can take your build to the next level. Last thing I want to say as well for Vitality is that a lot of the things here stack diminishingly. So Bullet Lifesteal as a stat itself, I buy the first one, I get 28%. And now 28% of the damage I deal with my bullets is going to heal me. However, this stacks diminishingly. So if I was to go 28% here, and then go for the 35% from Bullet Lifesteal, that would imply that I'm going to get 63%, but I am not. I'm only going to get 53%. So 10% of that Bullet Lifesteal is lost, and that's because these have diminishing returns. The other thing that has diminishing returns is also resistances. So I'll go Bullet Armor, Improved Bullet Armor, 50%. Think it's past this point that it becomes diminishing. So now if I look for Siphon Bullets, 18%, that should take me to 68%, but it's only going to take me to 59. I'm going to get half the value now after this 50% mark. I think that's consistent. So an important takeaway from this is to consider what sort of game you're in and what the enemy is itemizing. Stacking a lot of resistances is obviously going to be great for a tank hero, but then you might not want something like Colossus, which is going to give you an extra 40% and 40% because it's going to fall off. It's only going to take you to 70 and 67, which is still insanely tanky, but you know, you've lost essentially half of the value from the item since that active is diminishing. Now, you might think that just makes Colossus a bad buy for someone who is already buying the armors, but that's not necessarily true. As like I spoke about before, Bullet Resist Shredder exists, and so does Hunter's Aura, things that are going to reduce your resistances. And Colossus is going to help you get back up to that 50% point for both these armors and keep you tanky throughout the game, regardless of how much shreds the enemy is building. Now, last but not least, let's talk about spirit items and the way spirit scales on all of the heroes. The first thing that I want to make very clear is that just because spirit damage scales with spirit power does not mean that extra spirit, improved spirit, and boundless spirit are the best items you can possibly buy to increase your spirit damage, as it is simply not true. Boundless spirit actually only gives you on its own 81 spirit power, and it costs effectively 10,000 souls, 500 here, 3,000 here, and 6,200 here. Whereas for an item like Spiritual Overflow, you're going to get 50 spirit power, so 30 less, but for 3,000 souls less, and you're going to get many different stats. Other items like Unstoppable are also going to give you spirit power, so just because you want a lot of spirit damage doesn't mean Boundless Spirit is the best thing to buy for damage. Now, if you want to see where your heroes are scaling and how they scale, you just come into the sandbox, or you can even see it in the main menu somewhere. But you'll go on your hero, let's use Infernus as an example, and you'll hover over the ability and it will say with that purple star there next to the DPS of my Afterburn. That indicates that the DPS of this ability scales at 0.5 per spirit power. So if I was to grab extra spirit, which is going to give me plus 10 and also plus 4 for the base of a tier 1 spirit item, I'm going to gain 14 spirit power, which would indicate that I will gain 7 DPS as it scales at 0.5. So it goes from 15 to 22. You can do this with all heroes, and some heroes even have unique scalings. For instance, Haze. Haze is someone who is going to focus on gun damage mainly, but it doesn't mean spirit power is useless to her. Spirit power also scales Haze's mag size. So you can see here I have 25 bullets. Extra spirit isn't giving me any extra ammo at all, but if I buy it, I now have 32 bullets instead of 25. Other instances like this are 7, who has his movement speed scaling with spirit power. You could see I have 7.1. Then if I buy Boundless Spirit, I have 9 move speed. Now, the Spirit section also, like Vitality, has some of the strongest utility items in the game. Slowing Hex, for example, is going to deal spirit damage and slow, but at the same time, it's going to silence people's movement-based items and abilities. So if I was to use Slowing Hex on Infernus, for the duration of it, as indicated here, he will not be able to use his Flame Dash, and he will not be able to use mobility items like Warpstone. There's things like Decay, which is another great example of healing reduction, which for the duration is going to do 3.1% of his current health per second as damage, and reduce his healing by 15%. These different items can be great ways to counter enemies and great ways to help you execute your game plan. If a Vindicta on the enemy team is a problem, you can easily just knock her out of the sky by buying Knockdown, throwing it on her, and she's stunned and she will fall all the way to the ground. There are also items like cooldown reduction, which is great because this is not just going to affect abilities, but it will also affect your items from any tier. You could see here that the cooldown is 64 seconds on Unstoppable, but if I buy improved cooldown, you could see on the right where it says it modifies, it's going to take that from 64 seconds to 54 seconds. So guys, thank you for watching my ultimate itemization guide. I really do hope this helps you guys out. I tried to put as much useful information in as I could without yapping, though I think I might have yapped a little bit. I do apologize for that. But anyway, thank you for watching and goodbye.